Welcome. If you're looking to really get your head around complex subjects quickly, you're in the right place.
That's exactly what we aim for.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Gangster Disciples. It's a group with quite a long history and a reach that goes way beyond Chicago where they started.
Yeah, it's a big story. We've gone through various sources to pull out the essential threads, the origins, how they changed, who was in charge, what they got involved in, the key moments.
So we'll trace it from the mid-60s, Chicago, right across the U.S., and maybe even internationally.
That's the plan. We want to give you that clear, insightful view, but without drowning you in, every single detail.
Okay, let's jump in. Back to the start. 1966, Chicago South Side.
Mm.
Inglewood, specifically.
Right.
Now, the name Gangster Disciples, that wasn't the original name, was it?
No, not exactly. It started with Larry Hoover and his group, the Supreme Gangsters. The Gangster Disciples name came about later, kind of reflecting a mix. Supreme Gangsters, Devil's Disciples, and another group, the Black Gangster Disciples. And in those early days, there was a lot of conflict. A major war actually kicked off between the Supreme Gangsters and the Black Disciples Nation, which was led by David Barksdale.
So pretty intense from the get-go.
Yeah.
How did that rivalry eventually lead to, well, the group we're talking about?
Well, the big moment was 1969. Hoover and Barksdale, they agreed to a ceasefire.
Just stop fighting.
Well, yeah, but it was more than that. They actually unified their groups, merged them.
Really?
Yeah, creating the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, or BGDN. This alliance, former rivals joining forces, it totally reshaped the Chicago gang scene back then.
Wow, that is a major power move.
Yeah.
So by the early 70s, the BGDN is dominant.
Pretty much, yeah.
But then, just a few years later, 1974, David Barksdale dies. What happened then?
Barksdale died young, only 27, and his death meant Larry Hoover took full control of the Black Gangster Disciples.
So Hoover's now the undisputed leader.
Exactly. And that consolidation under Hoover, it really set the course for the group for years to come.
It sounds like Hoover was absolutely central. Now, I read something about an attempt to break up the BGD in around 1978. But Hoover kept it together, even though he was in prison.
That's right. He was already incarcerated then for murder. But yeah, he still had incredible influence. When that split was attempted in '78, he managed to pull together this huge alliance.
How did he do that from inside?
Strategic alliances, basically. He brought numerous street gangs and prison gangs, too, under his leadership. This coalition became known as the Folks Nation.
Ah, the Folks Nation. You hear that term a lot.
Definitely. And it wasn't just about stopping the BGN from fracturing. It massively expanded his influence.
So who was part of this Folks Nation alliance? Was it just disciple factions?
Oh, no, it was broad. You had the disciples, obviously, but also Seton disciples, Latin disciples, Spanish gangster disciples, groups like Ambrose, 2-1 Boys, two Boys, the 2 Sixers,
Okay.
Simon City Royals, Northside Insane Popes, La Raza, Spanish Cobras, Imperial Gangsters, Harrison Gents, Latin Eagles. Quite a mix.
That's a huge coalition.
It really solidified this kind of hierarchical structure under the Folks banner, shaped things for a long time.
So Hoover's really building power.
Yeah.
But things shift again, right? There's that big split around 1989. What happened there?
Yeah, by the late 80s, tensions were definitely rising. Within the BGDN, within the wider Folks Nation, too.
Why?
It seems Hoover was focusing more and more just on the Gangster Disciples themselves.
His original group, essentially.
Right. And other groups, especially the Black Disciples, felt like, their interests weren't being looked after anymore within that big structure, felt sidelined.
The loyalty issue, basically.
Exactly. So the Black Disciples broke away. They revived their original name, the Black Disciples Nation, or BDN.
And Hoover's side.
They increasingly just became known as the Gangster Disciples, the GDN. So that's how you get these two main rival factions that still exist today.
GDN and BDN.
Yeah. Though, interestingly, the sources say that as of 2022, with Hoover apparently renouncing the gang, the GDN doesn't really have a single full-time leader anymore.
Huh. Okay, that 89 split feels really key. So we've traced the history, the internal changes. Let's talk about what they actually do. Yeah. What kind of activities are they involved in, and how far did this influence spread?
Well, the sources list quite a range of criminal activities. Drug trafficking is definitely a major one. Seems central to their operations.
I think beyond drugs.
Things like assault, firearms offenses, fraud, homicide, definitely. Money laundering, and just organized crime in general.
And it's not just Chicago anymore, is it? They're way beyond that.
Oh, absolutely. Chicago's still key, but yeah, they've expanded massively. There's documented presence in New York City, places in Virginia like Richmond, Norfolk,
Oh,
North Carolina, Charlotte, Raleigh, Tennessee, Jackson, Nashville, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, big presence across the Northeast and Midwest.
and internationally, too, you mentioned.
Yeah, there are reports. Denmark, France, the UK, Mexico, Germany, Sweden. How many members are actually overseas, though? That's unclear. Unknown, really.
Still, that's quite a spread. What about membership numbers? Any estimates?
The numbers vary a bit in the sources. One suggests maybe 30,000 just in Chicago and spreading into at least 35 other states.
30,000, yeah.
Yeah. Others estimate the total membership could be anywhere from 50,000 up to maybe 90,000.
That's a huge range.
It is. But they're reportedly in over 100 cities, 50 states, strongest maybe in the Midwest and Southeast, and a big presence inside the U.S. prison system, too.
Right.
And interestingly, they were apparently the first modern street gang to really set up shop in Memphis, Tennessee. That was back in the 80s.
That's significant, how these groups take root in new places.
It is.
And what about allies and rivals? Who do they work with? Who are they against?
Well, alliances are reported with groups like Serenos 13, often under that broader folk nation umbrella we talked about, and the Simon City Royals.
Okay.
Rivals, definitely the Black Peace Stones, the Black Disciples, obviously, given that split.
Makes sense.
Also the Bloods, Latin Kings, People Nation, Vice Lords, Mickey Cobras. These rivalries, they really drive a lot of the conflict you see.
Got it. And sometimes specific names pop up in the media related to these groups. The sources mentioned a few rappers, for instance. We should be careful here, right?
Absolutely crucial. Names like Lil Jojo, Famous Dex, FBG Duck, 22 Grizz, Sababi, Ugly God. They appear in the source materials in connection with the Gangster Disciples.
But that doesn't mean they're confirmed members.
Exactly. It just means their names came up in reports or discussions about the gang. It doesn't confirm active, formal membership or anything like that. Very important distinction.
Good clarification. Okay, moving on. The history also includes some very serious incidents and major legal cases.
Yes, unfortunately. There was that incident overseas in Germany back in 2005.
Right, involving U.S. military personnel.
Yeah, U.S. Army Sergeant Juwan Johnson was killed. The people involved claimed to be gangster disciples. It seemed related to some kind of initiation beating that went wrong.
And people were convicted.
Yes, several U.S. servicemen. And Air Force Senior Airman Rico Williams got a major sentence. It really shows how far the influence, or claimed influence, reached.
A really sober example. And then there was the Leicester Street Massacre in Memphis in 2008. That name comes up too.
Yeah, a truly horrific crime. Multiple victims, including children. Initially, there were accusations pointing towards the Gangster Disciples.
But that wasn't the case in the end.
No. The investigation found that it was actually the brother of one of the adult victims, Jesse Dotson. He confessed and was convicted. The Gangster Disciples were cleared of involvement in that specific event.
Important to get that straight. These things can get confused.
Very important. Need accurate information.
Okay. More recently, there was violence in Chicago, 2020, at a funeral home.
That's right, July 2020. Shooters opened fire outside a funeral home in Inglewood. 15 people were wounded.
15.
Yeah. Luckily, no fatalities in that specific shooting, but sources suggested it was tied to an ongoing beef between different GD factions.
So internal conflict is still a factor.
Seems like it. Still capable of sparking serious violence.
And beyond these specific violent acts, what about the broader legal picture? We mentioned Araiko earlier.
Yeah, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's a major tool used against organized crime. There have been several big cases.
Like what?
Well, way back in '89, one member got 28 years for drug felonies. But more recently, 2016, federal IACO charges against 32 members in Atlanta.
32 members, that's significant.
Huge. The charges covered a pattern of alleged crimes. Murders, attempted murders, robberies, extorting rap artists for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Massive drug trafficking. Plus, they tried to seize 34 firearms as part of that case. It shows the scale the organization involved.
Definitely sounds like organized crime. And there were more IACO arrests after that.
Yes. January 2021, 7 members arrested in Illinois, Missouri. Again, federal IACO charges.
What were those related to?
Alleged murders linked to some kind of internal leadership fight, other violent acts, and again, drug trafficking, including a scheme to smuggle K2, synthetic cannabis, into prison.
They're persistent.
And the sources also note an arrest just last year, Feb 25th, 2025, of a reputed member named James Robert, though not many details on that one in what we reviewed.
Okay, so a constant stream of legal trouble right up to the present. Let's circle back to Larry Hoover. His story is just so tied up with the GDs. His decades in prison, those recent claims.
Yeah, Hoover. He was finally arrested in 95 after this incredibly long undercover investigation. 17 years, involving multiple agencies.
17 years.
Yeah. The charges were massive: conspiracy, extortion, money laundering, drugs, running a continuing criminal enterprise, basically leading the gang from prison. Wiretaps were key evidence.
And the outcome of that trial?
Guilty on all charges. In 97, he got 3 additional life sentences in federal prison on top of his existing state sentence.
3 more life sentences.
Yep. He's currently at ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal supermax prison. It shows how seriously the government took his leadership role, even from behind bars.
Decades of incarceration. But then in 2022, he apparently made some big claims.
That's right. July 2022, reports came out that Hoover stated he'd renounced his gang ties, said he was done with the Gangster Disciples.
After all that time, do people believe it?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Given his history, the level of control he had, the credibility, the actual impact of that statement, it's still, debated.
Yeah, hard to know what that really means on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing before we wrap up the symbols. Gangs often have strong symbols, right?
They do. For the Gangster Disciples, the main ones are the trident, like a 3-pointed pitchfork,
Okay.
and the Star of David.
The Star of David, why that?
That's a direct reference back to the co-founder, David Barksdale. It keeps his memory, his legacy, embedded in the gang's identity.
Right, connecting back to the very beginning. Okay, so bringing this all together, what are the big takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, it's clearly a long, complex story. You see the merging of rivals, the rise to become this huge force in Chicago, then these major splits creating factions.
And the massive expansion?
Exactly. Spreading across the U.S., maybe beyond. Deep involvement in serious crime that's impacted countless communities. And throughout it all, Larry Hoover's leadership, founding it, running it even from prison for decades, and then this recent alleged renunciation.
Plus the ongoing legal battles, the symbols. That's a lot.
It really paints a picture of a highly adaptive, persistent, and frankly damaging organization.
It's clear they aren't some static thing from the past. They've evolved, adapted, their influence is still felt. Hopefully this deep dive gives everyone a solid grasp of the key information from the sources we looked at.
Yeah, a condensed but thorough overview. And maybe it leaves us with something to think about.
Go on.
Well, considering how long the Gangster Disciples have been around, how far they've spread, what does that tell us about the bigger picture? The underlying factors in society that allow organized crime like this to persist, to spread, to keep adapting despite everything.
That's a heavy question. Definitely something to ponder beyond just the facts we've covered today.
For sure.